welcome to the second week of the State of Design Festival. My name is Kate Rhodes and I'm the creative director. Wow, what an amazing crowd. It's a thrill to see you all here. And it's a thrill that you're all here for a pretty special format, we think, for a conversation, this Skype format interview. As you know, we're not afraid of going into the unknown at State of Design Festival. And so with this interview, we may experience some ups and downs of the technology. Touch wood, been going well so far. If the Skype does go down, though, just work with us, we'll get back on and we'll all be okay. It's all part of the new and experimental way forward. But to the 9 to 5 program, 9 questions to 5 design thinkers over 5 days of the festival. So far, we've had 3 tremendous sessions. And it's all about a collective discussion, a dialogue, not a kind of lecture bomb dropped in from somewhere else, but a discussion about design ideas, issues around practice that involves the local design community in a one-on-one dialogue. Melbourne's leading designers came together a few months ago to formulate these questions, and they're here with us today. David Lancashire, Simon Mundy, Michaela Webb, Warren Taylor, Dom Hosfeed, Andrew Ashton, and I think that's all we have today. But can I now introduce our fantastic panel? I'm going to hand over to David to introduce Milton Glaser. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Milton Glaser, creator of one of the most iconic and knocked-off pieces of graphic design in the world, I Love New York. Milton Glaser is one of the most celebrated designers in the world, a rare breed of intellectual designer and illustrator. Glaser's presence on the impact of the profession is formidable. He's the first designer to receive the US National Medal of Arts presented to him by President Obama for a lifetime devoted to improving the way people communicate through innovation in graphic design. Excuse me, on a more personal note, I'd like to say I discovered Milton Glaser some 40 years plus ago. Pushpin Studios inspired me to become a graphic designer, and I'm still working. I'd just like to say, and on a personal note, to Milton, that the poetry of the hand, the line work, and the intellectual sort of thought process that is forever present in his work has been an inspiration to me. I'd like to quote Horace back to you, Milton. You've quoted Horace at some stage about high art and sort of applied art. Horace said that art should delight and inform, and my God, you certainly have, my friend. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much.
The first question we have for you, and you must excuse me, slight nerves. I feel like I feel like a groupie at a rock concert or something. One of the greatest designers in front of me here, and here we are. The first question was that came up in conversation. We noticed that you use Twitter, and we're Skyping today. Are you embracing technology, and does that impact on your practice today? Bearing in mind, I know some of your thought processes on the computer.
Well, I'm too stupid to embrace technology, and I can't even use a cell phone. It is that my capacity for understanding complex mechanical devices is nil. As a result of that, I try to find a way of working without that dependency. But it's really interesting because I work on the computer every day, but I have never touched a computer, nor do I have any idea of how to open it up. However, what I do is I sit next to one of the people at the studio. I have 3 marvelous young designers, and we embark on a kind of duet. And it's sort of more like dancing than it is like designing. And it's a very interesting procedure. We just start, we put something up on the screen, and I might say, what do you think about that? And he or she might say, that's really ugly. And I might say, well, let's go on to something else, and perhaps we should change the color. In any case, this dialogue and dance is extremely entertaining. And it also produces a kind of work that you cannot do individually. In fact, the computer offers this rare opportunity for collective work, meaning that two people can I suppose more, can simultaneously work on the same piece of work. And that is new in my experience, although so much work in design is collaborative. Most of it is a little bit at arm's length, where you say, I need a tall letter form that doesn't look too fragile, and somebody begins making it, and then you criticize, which is more like directing than it is like dancing. But what's nice about the computer is that it enables you to dance in a way that you've never been able to do before. There's a great benefit to not knowing anything about the computer, which is that you're not susceptible to its will. You must understand that the computer is an extraordinarily willful instrument. If you remember, the story about computers in the early days was that they would act like slaves and produce anything you willed. Not only that, because of their extraordinary skill, could amplify your skill so that the work that came out always looked cleaner and more professional and more finished than you were capable of doing. Well, now we've discovered there's a dark side to the computer, which is that it is very willful, and it wants you to do certain things in order for it to do them easily. The computer loves to do things easily, and it develops a repertoire that it teaches you of all the things it likes to do. The great benefit of never having any relationship with the computer is you can bypass that and make it do what you want to do, which is a very different experience. So when we say, as we do frequently in the field, well, that looks like the computer made it, right? You're always talking about this looks too computerish, this color relationship, this blending, this airbrush effect looks too computerish. All we mean is that the computer has dominated your senses and has made you do what it likes. On the other hand, if you don't know what the computer likes, you can work in a more independent and more open-minded way. So the first thing to acknowledge about the computer that it is not your slave, but is very actively engaged in making you its slave. The only reason I mention that at all is that you will see certain patterns of recurring thought that occur and can only be attributable to the peculiar gifts of the computer.
There's another question coming up here, Milton. Thank you for that. By the way, the room here is absolutely full.
Oh, thank you. Hi, everybody.
Hello, Milton. I'm just wanting to ask about what you're working on right now. It'd be really great to hear about some of the work you're producing right now. What's pushing your buttons? What's inspiring you right now?
A variety of things. There's a lot of work I've been doing that are independent works where I use my real assignments to do assignments that I'm interested in. And so I've been doing a series of disappearing portraits of Shakespeare. And I started on the Shakespeare project some years ago as a kind of offshoot of working for a Shakespeare drama company. At the same time, I was doing patterns. About 5 or 6 years ago, I decided to use the computer to make patterns. As you know, the computer's a genius at pattern making, but again, trying to make patterns that were counterintuitive. And so I did that for a couple of years, and after the third year, some people came to the studio one morning and they said, "You got any rugs?" And I said, "Sure." And I took all these patterns I'd been making without a client, and they turned out to own a company in Tibet that made rugs. And so I think sometime later this year, there will be a presentation of 15 or so rugs made inadvertently by me without knowing who my client was ever going to be. But at the same time, I woke up one morning and said it would be very funny to take the patterns and relate them to something where they had no relationship that was discernible, which you do frequently in art, as you know. And so I thought, well, I have all these Shakespeare portraits, I have all these patterns, why don't I make Shakespeare patterns? And so I did that, and I've been doing that for the last 3 or 4 years. Portraits of Shakespeare combined with patterns that make, in some cases, the portraits unrecognizable. I have a little presentation, exhibition that I did called The Search for the Miraculous, or One Thing Leads to Another. And this idea of taking two things that are unrelated and then forcing them to relate is a kind of basic operating procedure that I have. And it's been very useful as a point of view in terms of keeping the work moving and changing it and making it go somewhere. Some work is inevitable and continuous. Other work have to be disrupted. And so I'm very interested in the relationship between continuity and disruption. And a lot of the work that I've been doing has that theme. In fact, the Shakespeare portraits are also about perception. At what point does your understanding of what you're looking at disappear? So I've done in a sequence of 4 portraits, starting where you can't see anything and gradually having Shakespeare emerge so he's recognizable. And that question is such an interesting question about at what point can you recognize what you're looking at, that has occupied a lot of my time recently.
That's wonderful.
Milton, I'd like to ask you a question about a side of the industry that's more about relationships, and that's with your clients. I think the dynamics of client relationships have changed over the years, and I think there's a lot of people in this room who now find themselves in a situation where they can't always speak to the people they need to speak to, the decision makers. There's a layer of people that they now have to manage. I'm kind of interested to hear your thoughts on how you see this direction in client relationships happening and how you've managed to sustain friendships.
Well, that's a profound issue and a continuous one. I mean, one of the things about being a designer is you discover that if you have no power to effectuate a solution, you have nothing. Unless you have someone in a position of power who both trusts you and consider your judgment significant, there's no way of getting anything good through. I mean, because all the impetus comes from the other side, which is to say the problem is done before you begin. And if you have enough people working on the other side, which is say you go into a meeting with 4 people, all of whom are experts on marketing or advertising or language or whatever they are, and you make a presentation, you can count on the work coming out pedestrian, mediocre, or banal. I mean, the problem is you have to have leverage with somebody who makes the decisions. If you don't have that leverage, you're an orphan. There's nothing you can do about it. And you're the victim of somebody else's, consistently, somebody else's judgment. Which is not to say that those people are not sometimes right. They are. But if there isn't what I call a climate of affection, which is if you don't really like the people you're working with, and there isn't a sense of shared values and shared interests, boy, that's a miserable relationship. You know, I have problems in that I can't even go to lunch with somebody I don't like. So the idea of working for people that you don't like or don't respect is mortifying. And it is, I would say. I don't know whether it's changed a lot. I mean, with the rise in professionalism, so-called, there are more professional critics in the mix than they used to be. Design, when I started, which was 200 years ago, design used to be kind of amateurish because not everything was known. And marketing in those days was primitive. People had suspicions about what would happen, but they had no certainty. And now everything is so quantified and everybody's so certain of everything that certainty robs an essential part of design and creativity, which is ambiguity. I mean, I'm very interested in what cannot be quantified. I'm very interested in all that stuff that you don't know in advance until through intuition and through smelling it, you have a sense of what's needed rather than a rational procedure where you can analyze the information in terms of what has already happened, which always puts you in the position of repeating what has already happened. So the great difficulty with marketing and with experts in basically the agency world is they always want to do whatever they're doing on the basis of what has already succeeded. And as you know, eventually working that deadens the experience and makes the emergence of the new impossible.
This sort of leads to another question, Milton, and there's a lot of, apart from a lot of older designers, or should I say mature designers in the audience, there's a lot
Use mature.
Good, yeah. There's a lot of young people, and one of the questions would be, where would an 18-year-old Milton in today's education system find himself after completing his studies? And in some ways you did touch on market research, which is, I suppose, clouding some design. But, yeah, what do you think?
Well, it's an excellent question. I think my instincts would be to continue on a path where I would continue my education and where I continue to learn, and not only the technical aspects of design or what's hot or something else, but try to get a decent education that would give me a sense of human culture and of history and of psychology, and realize that everybody should get a later start in the design world, because what happens is you have young people, say 18, going into a universe where they have no sense of what the actual boundaries are or what they need to know in order to do effective work. And I've always felt that the design profession is too parochial, too narrow-minded, too focused on the specific professional or trade elements of design to understand that having a basically sound education and understanding the nature of politics and of power and certainly understanding what art is about. There's been a kind of division between art and design, part of which is appropriate, but you have to know the difference. And the thing I always attribute to my own longevity in the field is the fact that I had an extremely good art education and continued it for at least 10 or 15 years after I'd gotten out of school. And that has been an incredible resource for me, because it's just broadened my mind and gone beyond the professional model of what you're supposed to follow.
Do you think that history informs the future then?
Without any question, very nicely put.
We have a kind of a lead-on question to that, because we know how heavily you're involved in education as a professional designer. I'm just wondering if you could expand upon the benefits that you see professionally and personally of contributing so heavily as a professional and continuing that through your career.
Well, it's been beneficial for me in many ways. I've been teaching continuously for over 50 years, and I still look forward to a night in class. It's great when you have a good class. It's not so good when you have a dull class, but even in a dull class, you'll find 2 or 3 people who will act as an intermediary and transmit ideas to the rest of the class. And what you see under good circumstances, is the actual change that occurs to the people in the class. By the end of the term, if you've been successful in teaching, the people are not exactly the same as they were at the beginning. And the other question is, when people ask me, why do you teach? I mean, why do you want to live only for yourself? I mean, I really want to transmit everything I know to somebody else. I mean, my life, not having children, maybe that affects it. But my idea of a rich life is to basically pass it on, to take everything you've learned and let somebody else examine it and see if it's useful to them. I can't imagine a life where you didn't think of these communal acts as being essential to your being. So teaching has always been essential for me. And there was a note here that said that teaching is not as prevalent or as popular in Australia or perhaps in Europe, and that surprises me, because here, for instance, everybody wants, all good professionals want to teach. There's no problem at all getting first-class people to teach here. Maybe it's like many things, maybe it's a kind of fashion. Once you get a few people who are known teaching, then others think that that's a cool thing to do, and they join. Whatever it is, circumstantially, people love to teach in the United States, and we have many, many good art schools with excellent teachers.
Yeah, that's great, thanks.
That's wonderful. So, Milton, about the moral compass, something you've spoken about a lot in your, millions of times, I'm sure. Do you feel that this is more important now for a designer, or do you feel it's always been really important? And I guess, is there an example you can give us where there's been a decision that set off your moral compass?
Well, my general approach has always been the same, which is do no harm. And I think that is a kind of rough description of what your responsibility is good enough, even though it's vague. But the idea that you would be responsible through your actions of harming someone is just reprehensible to me. I mean, if that was deliberate, I won't do cigarette advertising for obvious reasons. I mean, I actually once, maybe 40 years ago, did a cigarette package for a German company. It was never produced, but retrospectively, I would say, why did I ever even think of doing that? Partially because it wasn't an American market. It was out of the country, somewhere else. Because what produces that sense of you can do work that harms people, is a sense that the audience is the other, right? That the audience is not like you. It's not your community. It's not your country. It's not your neighborhood. It's them. And that sense of alienation is responsible for most of the mischief in the world. The fact that you can do something and you won't directly be affected by it, your children won't be affected by it, people who live in your town won't be. At a certain point, you realize that that is a cop-out and that you can't think that way, because ultimately we're all responsible for everybody. So I think that simple idea, and it's nice that it can be simply expressed, do no harm. Or more precisely, if one wants to take what turns out to be the most fundamental wisdom of the human species, the golden rule, do unto others as you would have others do unto you, is an excellent guide for a position that is both ethical and moral.
That's wonderful.
Milton, the complexity of your work has been made, has the complexity of your work been made possible because you draw? I'm infatuated by the hand, and I'm sure you are, because you've delighted me with so many images that you can actually tell it's by the hand and not the computer. Do you think it's more relevant to have this in-depth hand-eye coordination? And I think we've touched on this before, and how the history informs your work.
Well, it's a big question. It's a big question, and not susceptible to an easy answer. But the idea of why drawing is important, which I've written about, has to do with understanding what is real. The act of drawing itself, for instance, makes you observe the relationship between what is real that you're looking at and the representation of it that you have made. The distance between the reality of your subject matter and the drawing that you have done of it is where your understanding of reality resides. Above all, art is a mechanism for making a judgment about what is real. And that's how it serves us. And in fact, if you were to describe what the fundamental effect of art is, it is precisely that. It has nothing to do with style or period or anything else. It is that in the presence of art, you are more able to make a judgment of what is real. And because of that, you probably are helping in the survival of the species. But if you don't draw, and you don't do that extraordinary thing that goes from your eyes to your brain, down your neurological path to your hand, how are you going to understand what form is? The thing that drawing does more than any other activity is it helps you understand what form is and how to create it. People who can't draw, and many designers, as you know, can't draw, and many designers do good work without drawing. But what drawing does, it frees you from having to find an equivalent for everything you want to express. Which is to say, if you're a designer and you're looking for a particular kind of rounded tree, you have to go into the internet and get that tree and trace it. So if you can draw, you can make it. It just is an enormously liberating activity in terms of what you can physically create as an object, right? Whether it's a letter form or a pussycat. So, for instance, if you are a letterer, there's no way to be a letterer without being able to draw. I mean, you can create those forms now on one or many of the programs on the computer, but your sense of discretion about doing it is so much more powerful when you physically represent it. So not drawing to me is a limitation not simply of design objects, but rather of your attitude towards what is possible. I think that everything's possible because I can more or less, and I don't want to sound boastful about it, I can more or less represent anything I want by drawing, and that frees me from the responsibility of going on a search to find it before I do it. So for me, drawing is an essential tool or instrument, and also it changes your brain. The act of drawing changes your brain in the same way that the act of playing a violin changes your brain. They're doing these studies in history showing that little kids who have perfect pitch come into a classroom and they're only 2 out of 10. And if they play the violin for 6 months, 6 out of 10 develop perfect pitch. And what happens is that the brain has changed. And if you examine the brain, you discover that it's no longer physically the same. And all that happened was you play the violin. I feel the same thing. The same thing is true of drawing. It changes the brain, and consequently changes the way you think about the work.
That's great. Designers starting out today, Milton, they have so much information, access to so much information, in actually really small bite-sized pieces. Do you think this change of information changes their work? Do you feel like it's changed work over time, the way we access the small bite-sized bits of information?
I have a little trouble with the question because I'm not sure about what it means. We tend to produce information in small bites. I'm not exactly sure that we are responding to information in small bites. Are you talking about the virtual world, the fact that all of this stuff is on TV screens or movie screens or in some way already transformed before we look at it? I mean, clarify that a little bit for me.
I think what the question means, sorry, I'm reading this out, is that when designers start working, they can just grab loads and loads of bits of information, probably from the internet. So they're accessing loads of bite-sized pieces of information. So it's a different way of, I suppose, researching. Do you feel that that has changed work, designers' work, this way of accessing information?
I don't know how to answer that question. I'm not quite
Milton,
sure. I'm sure it has. I'm sure it has changed things, but I have no idea of how. I mean, I think one thing that has changed things is our perception that most of our experience are virtual, and our sense of reality has been damaged by that. It seems to me people don't understand that anything is real anymore, and that the power of these virtual images, right, is so profound that people develop a kind of immunity to their own real experiences. I don't know how well I can explain that idea, but it in my mind accounts for the distance that people are from their own experience. Certainly, I would say that characterizes young people in the United States, the sense that things don't matter. For instance, when I was young, there was more, during the 60s notably, a more direct response to political action in the world. My sense is, at least in the United States, I don't know what's going on in Australia, that political events no longer seem to be of any consequence to the young. So that if something awful happens politically, they won't be out on the street the next day. And I'm wondering if that is a consequence of not having a sense that anything is real.
Okay, yep.
I think, Milton, you'll find that Australia is exactly the same as the United States, and on that question.
Okay.
I think the general nature of that question, sorry Milton, I'm out of frame here. The general nature of that question goes back to what you said about designers knowing more about history, the way in which information is presented today, and the access that designers, particularly young designers, have to this information affects their output.
Okay.
That's why I'm not in the frame.
Milton, I've got a question more about is design as celebrity. You're reasonably well known already. We find today that a lot more designers are actually using their status, and it's as much about the way they work as much as the industry itself. Do you think it's good to promote this cult of personality? Is it sort of good for the industry at large, or a bad thing?
Everybody wants to be celebrated and noticed. I mean, one of the worst things that can happen to you as a human being is that nobody notices you. And of course, part of the culture of art school is to convince you that you're a genius. Everybody who goes to art school either hopes or believes that they're a genius, only frequently unrecognized. But this latent hope in everyone that someday they will be patted on the head and acknowledged as a genius that they are is something that's very hard not to be susceptible to. You can observe it in a lot of work that's being done that has no observable purpose except to be noticed. And so there's a lot of work that is transgressive and outrageous and produces the effect of people asking, who did that? Not necessarily as a form of admiration, but of shock. And I have to say, there is a profound relationship between the glamour of design and show business. It's not particularly useful in a personal sense. It's probably not helpful to the ego, but it is almost inevitable in a culture that celebrates celebrity and identifies performers by virtue of that celebrity. So if you become famous, one of the assumptions is you'll get more and better work and will make more money. So in some ways, the energy that drives the search for celebrity is really based on money, and the fact that if you want to be in the high-earning category, and it's hard to be a part of culture without that being one of your aspirations, you'll try to find a way to be noticed and observed. As I say, I don't think that is the most desirable reason to continue work, or the condition that produces the best work, but it is an inevitable part of our profession and capitalism itself.
Indeed.
Milton, I'm going to change chairs here, but I'll be off camera.
Hi, Milton.
Hi, how you doing?
Good. We have a few questions that have been sent in from Twitter, and one of them is in regards to the I Love New York campaign. The question is mockery, the campaign has been reinterpreted and recreated many times. Is mockery flattering or just plain old plagiarism?
No, I had trouble understanding the final phrase. Try that again once more.
The question was in regards to the I Heart New York campaign. Is mockery flattering or is it just plain old plagiarism?
I didn't understand it. Did you understand it? Could you ask that question maybe in a different location, maybe up front, because there's a lot of echo.
Yeah. Sorry, Milton. Yeah, the question was the I Heart New York has been reinterpreted so many ways. Do you find that flattering, or is it just simply plagiarism?
Well, I think it's fabulous. I mean, you live all your life hoping to influence people and hoping people will get your message and that they will respond to it. And here was this crazy piece of printed ephemera, a little scrap on in the back of a taxi cab that suddenly circulated the globe, and it's been around for 35 years, and you wonder, what did I do? I'd like to know. Now, I think it's great when an idea you have basically finds a community to affect, and that other people use it, and it's really an extraordinary event in my life. I'm very happy for anybody to copy it any way they'd like. Well done and badly done, but the fact that you can affect people's perception is a wonderful thing.
I think we're going to take some questions from the audience now.
Oh, it's fine.
Do you have any questions that they'd like to ask Milton?
You, Milton. In terms of at the start you spoke about the computer dominating the way we do design. I was wondering, as a young designer, how can I avoid the computer dominating my designs?
You want to repeat that? I couldn't hear. The echo is really serious. So
it's a question from a young designer asking, how can he avoid the computer affecting his design?
How can you avoid the computer affecting your design?
How can he avoid having the computer dominate or affect his design?
In reference to what I was speaking about earlier, I think the only way you can do that is through consciousness. I mean, you just have to look at what you do and saying, is this something that has been so affected by the tool I use or the mechanism I use that it has been transformed into something that looks like dozens of other things? I mean, the thing that is most evident when you're being dominated by the computer is that stylistically the work looks general, or as though 1,000 other people could have done it. I mean, that's one of the signals that you would have in producing anything fresh. But in the case of the computer, there are certain salient characteristics, like a certain way of gradating color, that are a giveaway.
I'd just like you to talk more about your influences with the I Heart New York campaign. I know it inspires my love of New York. Can you just talk about how your city inspires you, or how you get inspired? Like you're saying, outside of the computer, your city can inspire you for design. Can you talk about that, please?
I'm sorry, you're going to have to repeat that.
It was just a question in regard to your inspirations, reflecting on the I Heart New York campaign and how the city itself inspired the design. Can you talk more about your other inspirations and how this person who's asked the question has said that that design gives her a sort of visual representation of New York?
I can't say that the city inspired my design. I mean, the question of inspiration is a complex one. I would say that, in general, it sounds a little silly, but anything you pay attention to can be inspirational, which is to say, I'm sitting here with a piece of crumpled paper in front of me. That piece of crumpled paper, if I'm willing to pay attention to it, is totally extraordinary. The way it reflects the light, the way the shadow defines the edge, the fact that the shadow goes from a dark to a light patch to a dark to another light patch is astonishing. What is causing all that? So when people talk about inspiration as though it's a peculiar effect that only significant events or forms have the capacity to elicit. It's not true. I mean, paying attention, being able to look at something with an open mind is the thing that is finally the most inspirational part of being a designer or being an artist. It is simply the willingness to look at things without preconceptions.
That's a good answer. And one more question.
Milton, my question is, when does illustration become fine art, or can illustration become fine art, or are they two totally separate things?
Well, unfortunately, no one has a definition of what art is to begin with, and consequently, they don't know what illustration is either. What I said earlier is fundamentally what I believe, that the function of art is to enable you to understand what is real. The interesting thing about that is anything can produce that effect. A handkerchief with a beautiful pattern, certainly a painting, in some cases even a cherry pie. The fact is that if we stop defining art in terms of its characteristics from when it was made to its characteristic effect on the audience it addresses, you get a much clearer idea. So illustration can be art, but only when it is. And I would say that in most of our life, the fraction of things that are art is very small. And that includes most painting. One of the things you discover late in life is that most painting is not art. It falls into totally different category. And again, using that definition, that if it makes you see what art is more easily, what life is more easily, then it's art. If it doesn't, it's something else. So, to come to a conclusion, sometimes art can be found in illustration, and sometimes art can be found in painting. But you have to make an individual judgment about that.
Milton, I've got a quick question for you. At the opening night of the State of Design Festival, when I made my opening speech, I quoted you, and you had been quoted in our local newspaper here about your definition of design as being taking an existing condition and turning it into a preferred one. This is your definition of design, one way of thinking about it. And I wonder, with that in mind, how can we as designers, or how can we use design, how can we help make our politicians make change? How can we move into that preferred condition using design in a political sense, either as politicised individuals, or how can we take messages to our politicians to get us towards that preferred condition?
You're going to have to repeat that very long question.
Someone want to summarise me? Milton, it's really just a question about how you talk about design as being going from an existing condition to a preferred one, that this might be a definition of design. How can we use that in a politicised way, either to make change where we live, whether that's influencing our politicians or being more politicised ourselves? Can you talk about moving towards this preferred condition with design?
Well, it's not a preferred position of design. It's not exactly what we're talking about. We're talking about any preferred position, all right, which is an existing condition. The street lights down at the corner are going off sync so that automobiles are crashing into one another. The design objective is to prevent people from being killed that way. So you change the lighting sequence. So there you have moved from a position where people are being killed to where people are not being killed by changing a light sequence. But that is an act of design. And the first thing you wanted to achieve is you simply didn't want people being killed. The second was the technical issue of how you adjusted the lights. So every situation, including political one, start with the objective. What do you want to produce? What do you want to produce in the political system that you consider to be harmful to the public? Well, you have to be analytical about what is the harm, and then you have to figure out what changes it. And every condition is different. And I have to say that in political life, it's very difficult because of something we started talking about earlier. You don't have access to power. And without that access to power, there's almost no way of changing existing conditions. So I would suspect that the first way, if you want to change a political situation, would be where is the power and how can I get access to it?
Thank you, Milton.
You're very welcome.
Everyone, please join me now in thanking Milton Glaser for speaking with us this morning and to our fantastic panel.
Thank you, Melbourne.
Milton, I hope you could hear that rousing applause. Thank you very much, and have a lovely evening in New York. From us in Melbourne. Goodbye.
It's been nice to be with you.
Thanks again.
Bye-bye.
Okay, wow. Well, please join me in thanking Warren Taylor, who's gone and sat down on the floor, Simon Mundy, Michaela Webb, David Lancashire. Now I'm going to introduce you to the Part 2 panel. It's going to be moderated by Dominic Hosford. He's also joined by Warren Taylor, Michaela Webb, Andrew Ashton, and David Lancashire. Thank you.
Thanks, Kate. I'm in charge of this session. And if you thought the first part was good, this second part's going to be sensational. Can everybody hear me at the back? Is that working? It's really hard to tell up here. Great. We talked a little bit in the green room where there's no alcohol. I might make that point, which is slightly disappointing. But we talked briefly about who might come today and what their expectations might be. And I think it'll be really interesting for anybody under the age of 30 to put their hand up so we can sort of get a feel of how many younger people there are. Wow, I mean, that's the bulk of the audience is under 30, which is an interesting indication of the impact that somebody in their 80s can have. And I think that's one of the things that I really took out of it, and doing a bit of research, is that this is slightly against the convention of our industry, that when you get to a certain age, you're actually not of much use anymore and you tend to disappear. And Milton Glaser has retained that relevance. Perhaps the work is slightly out of sync with contemporary style, but his intellect is such that, and I don't usually take notes on these things, but I've got pages of notes and quotations. It's like he's a running quotation. Everything he talked, really, you could note down and take something from. So I'm just going to summarise a few of the main points, not all 9 questions, but just a few things that stuck with me. One was about education and passing it on, and I think that would be something that we could really focus a little bit on here, is this idea that in America, and Andrew Ashton brought this up in our discussions about these questions, there is a desire for people as esteemed as Milton to actually teach and to pass on their knowledge. And that's not really happening here, and I think it'd be really good to maybe understand why that is. And Milton sort of said that I think people feel like they should pass things on, but I think there are perhaps some reasons why that doesn't happen here, so it'd be good to actually flesh that out. The moral compass thing is something also that Glaser was really, I think, ahead of the curve on that from the get-go he was actually using this idea of don't do harm to people. And I think if we probably surveyed younger people now, much more aware of this idea that you have a choice with design. Certainly when I came through education, you never really considered saying no to anything, you just basically did it. That may have been me, I may not have a moral compass, but I think it's interesting how he made that comment about young people not being in touch with politics, but I think there's much more availability of projects or studio projects or opportunities for younger people to have a say politically or socially. We can maybe talk a little bit about that. The other thing was, and this is a bugbear of mine, and I know it's a bugbear of David as well, is this link of drawing to creativity, and how what I think would be really good to discuss is really whether it's actually idealistic to expect people who are from a very young age encouraged to not necessarily use a pencil. I mean, are we just basically hitting our heads against the wall saying things like, you need to draw more, when really from a very young age you're not actually given the opportunity to do that? And I think if we looked at our own educations as well, I mean, there was a lot of opportunity to draw, and it was really forced upon you, whereas now that isn't the case. You have to really want to do it, or you have to have an environment. Either you're locked in a room where you don't have access to keyboards and to touchscreens. So really, is that just are we just swimming against the stream? Do we need to just accept that this is the contemporary paradigm, and we just say, if you do want to draw, do it, but otherwise you have to find another way of being original? I mean, I think it's really heartening that there's probably a lot more people who are looking for ways to be creative, and some of the things that Milton said about drawing is not limiting, whereas a computer can be limiting. And he talked about the slavery, enslaving a computer, or computers enslaving us. All that stuff I think is really relevant. And also attentiveness, and how drawing really gets people to look. And I reckon that was, to me, some of the last things he talked about was actually about focusing on things and looking at things, because so much of what we see now is ephemeral and in and out and disappears. And I think that was the gist of that question that Michaela was trying to get across, was this idea that we receive so many bite-sized pieces of information, and how much of it has any impact at all. And when he talked about that screwed up piece of paper and actually stopping and looking at things, to me that really summed up his approach, which is the pencil slows you down. You have to actually consider what you're doing. A computer does things so effectively and so seductively that you don't have any time to really, you have to stop and pull back from that. And it's really hard to do that. I think also, maybe that is a bit idealistic as well, because our industry now is really predicated upon volume. It's not based on the sorts of slow projects that Milton maybe came through, where you had 3 weeks to do things. We have three minutes to do things now because of the power of the computer. So I've babbled on for ages there. We might finish it there.
Can I just say something in the context of passing information on or passing knowledge? How many people in the audience are 65 or over?
Yay.
Good, fantastic. Maybe next time there's an event, we can get a fill it half and half. Thanks, Billy.
You missed out on cherry pie. That's a comment, sorry. I'm just segueing. I just heard cherry pie. I shouldn't let go of that.
So I might start with David. I mean, what was your sort of overriding take from the talk today?
You probably gathered I was very nervous earlier because he's one of my idols. I've been trying to see him for years in person, but I haven't. The closest I've got is a member of AGI, Alliance Graphique Internationale, but I've never actually seen him rock up. But what I took away from it is almost what I knew anyway, in some ways, in the fact that drawing, the same experiences has happened to me. If I've drawn something, and I'm coming from a fine art base here because I started fine art when I was 11 in the north of England, so I've been actually lucky in some ways that I've been connected to art and design for what seems like an eon now. But the thing is, if you actually sort of take the time to draw, in these, and it's even got worse. I'm sorry, it sounds rambling. I'll get over it. If you actually take a photograph digitally, you can take millions of photographs. Some time ago, back in the dark ages, when you had film, and film used to cost quite a bit of money, slides or black and white, it actually cost you money. It was a process. You'd take the photograph, so you'd be very careful about maybe what image you'd take and remember something, and then you'd forget. But if you actually sit down and draw something, I can actually, as a kid even, when I was a teenager, I can look at some of my early drawings when I was 16 and actually remember what happened on that day. And I think that's what Milton Glaser was on about here. I think it was sort of the connection between a thought process and drawing. There's something really does happen between the eye, the brain and the hand. And I actually don't think computers deliver that. And I think he outlined that in the sense that computers, you need to actually be in control of them, not the other way around.
But he made an interesting point about the way that computers force him to collaborate in a different way, which I thought was really interesting. That was
an interesting one. I thought that was probably the most... and look, it happens in my studio, much to the bane of the designers I work with who are sat down there. I mean, there's a connection that they probably think I should go away. but yeah, and that really surprised me, and I think it's... And a beautiful description of dancing. I think that's fantastic. I mean, the man definitely is a poet and a philosopher, I mean, as well as a lot of other things. So it's sort of, yeah, you're right, Dominic. It's sort of.
But I mean, just on that theme of drawing, Andrew. I mean, is it really just an idealistic idea that? I mean, I find myself.
I just think we're shackling. I think it's. Look, I love the romance of all what you're saying, and I just want to be contentious because I'm half asleep.
Because you are contentious.
But I think I've just sort of written it down so I don't forget it. I think it's sort of more about sort of modern day society and its ability or its capacity to teach its people to play and in essence to slow down so that they... because that art of, you know, you talk about the pencil and drawing, you know, you talk about building blocks and you talk about the sort of the art of reading and comprehension. It's an idea. These ideas help you to slow down so you can think more deeply about the marks you're putting on the page, more deeply about the words you're making, or more deeply about the photographs you're taking. And I think, in a way, we're sort of like, as much as I love pencils and all that sort of thing, maybe we sort of have a look at the bigger thing, which is about just teaching people to play again, rather than just getting straight into the, straight into the dollars and cents of, life.
Andy, look, I think playing is a fantastic way to
because not all of us can draw, I've got to say.
I think everybody can draw. I don't think...
Not as well as you.
No. I'm
quite
dreadful.
intimidating.
Compared to Picasso, I'm crap.
Yeah.
So everybody can draw.
Jeez.
I mean, and everybody can play. Unfortunately, I believe this, I think the computer has taken the play out of people's life. We sold the play of everything from this apps to that apps to this to that, and it's destroying an actual ability to play and look at reality. Glaser touched on that, the virtual and the reality.
I think we tend to blame the computer for lots of things, and I think
we've got to blame ourselves.
I'm not blaming the computer per se, but I'm blaming the actual process of what's happened through computers.
But do you think the way he sort of said he's moved that on and he's performing this dance, this poetic dance with someone else, that now there can be an element of play if there's the two of you working on it together and there's a conversation and a dialogue? Because I feel like I don't do that much drawing. I might sketch things and they're awful sketches and they're not for anybody else to see. The drawing, it doesn't necessarily, I don't think it has to be a mark or an art form. I just think it's about that contemplation and then that dialogue and how you do that. There's so many different ways of doing that. And we just need to do more of it, more dialogue, more contemplating.
But I think we've got to teach ourselves to slow down more, really.
Well, yeah, you're right. And in fact, why do we have slow food now? I mean, the microwave, I remember Eric speaking and saying, did the microwave improve cooking as the computer improved typography? I mean, it's the same sort of genre, if you like. It's the same sort of...
We're sounding like a bunch of old farts.
I don't think there's... Well, old fart, young fart. Yes.
I think I know what Andrew's talking about. There's a great quote in the documentary on Milton Glaser where I'm not sure if it's an old collaborator of his that says that the hand doesn't operate itself. And then I think that comes back to Glaser. I mean, everything he said with such clarity, and you could see people in the audience nodding, and it's almost like there's an understanding of what he's saying, but the way he actually sort of presents it with his work and the way he speaks, I think makes designers think about the process before it gets to the hand. So whatever's happening up here should affect whether it's a pencil or a mouse, and I think that's where you're right. I mean, we do tend to say, well, it's the computer is responsible for a lot of things, and he also made it clear that it wasn't necessarily, he used the word looking computerish, and where as designers we're often turned off by that, but it dominates what we see in the visual landscape. And I think designers are probably the most critical of their own practice, and it's about sort of making that sort of connection with the people with power, as he said. Yeah. I think we've got a question.
A question and a comment. I rather think we might be missing the point about drawing and what Milton was saying about the creation of neural pathways, and that drawing changes the brain. A lot of discussion in the last few years has been about design thinking and very little about design doing, about the physicality of the design process and the skills, the physical skills that you need. We have an Australian Institute of Sport that looks at how sports people achieve holistically, physically, socially, even chemically. But because we understand how the act of a sportsman, that achievement, is a holistic one. It's very similar to design. It is not merely a mental activity. It's not merely a physical activity. It's a combination of both, and drawing is very much the physical activity that changes the brain of a designer.
If there's any educators out there,
I agree with that.
I too.
It is very much about practice too. I mean, it's about having the opportunity to practice and continue.
I think also, having come from a potato factory studio once, creative people are put in front of stations and they've got this expectation to produce work, and there is not very much opportunity for those people to get physical with their work. And I think that's part of something that has to be incorporated in practice, in that you might not be drawing as much anymore, but certainly with the installation and the making of your work, it's sort of interesting if someone's doing print design with people I've worked with in the past, they don't make any of their work real. They don't actually physically cut it out. They don't engage with it as a real person would. Or if you're doing an interpretive piece, it's about getting down to the site, and it's about participating in the construction of what you're putting up, and finding ways that you can get physical with your work again. Because I certainly agree. I've sort of noticed, and I'm a terrible example of it. But designers are getting fatter, and it's because they're behind machines. And I've noticed the marked difference between young guys coming out just in 20 years to when I started, because it was more physical. You did do a lot more running around and bits and pieces, but now we just sort of sit in front of a computer and use the equivalent of an apple a day in energy. And I do agree. I think it's a physical act.
We don't use it, we lose it.
Yeah.
I just want to touch on clients and designers and another. There's a couple of comments that he made which also seem quite idealised, and this idea of not working with people you don't like. So he said that he wouldn't even have lunch with somebody he doesn't like.
Good idea.
It's a good idea. I mean, just how practical is that, though? To sort of, yeah, and I remember you saying that. I think we talked about this, that you said, why would I bother? Why would I work with somebody I don't like? And maybe that's just me being naive. I actually don't use that as a kind of a judgment of whether I work for people.
I'd probably suspect that he doesn't use it on a day-to-day basis. I think it's just like it's an attitude that prevails through a lot of things.
Like, but is this him reflecting upon his career and being in a position now where he can pick and choose? I mean, it's very hard to sort of have that to draw that line in the sand when you're starting off in a career, to say, well,
I've been in a situation in my career where I've walked out of meetings or walked out of a project and said I don't want to work on the project.
I agree with that.
Twice. Mm-hmm. And that seems probably not enough, because life's too short in some ways, but I think you have to believe in what you believe in.
Can I ask you how you actually told them that you wouldn't work with them then?
One was the Desert Wildlife Park in Alice Springs. I was berated in a meeting, and I said to the landscape architect, after coffee break, "I'm not coming back." He said, "You have to." I said, "No, I don't." So I went to the airport, got on a plane and came back to Melbourne. By that, I forfeited all the fees, by the way. I mean,
Yeah.
But it's interesting. I am now working with one of those people on a job in Canberra who's a horticulturalist. And he was in that meeting. And actually, we had dinner and I said, "I know your face." He said, "I know your face too." And he said, he was one of the best guys in the meeting. I mean, it was fantastic. So it's really interesting how things follow you around. And in that case, it was a good vibe. But more than ever, I think you've actually got to believe in what you're doing. I think really, and I suppose everybody says that to a point. But if you believe in what you do, then I think you'll do a good job of it.
You've got the 5-minute warning now.
Did you do that by hand intentionally, Kate? That 5? After the discussion.
Kate's just drawn a 5 uniform.
Crossed out the
what typeface is
Calibri font.
Should we take some questions from the audience? That's the best thing to do.
Just a general comment on, actually I've written it down as well, young and old and computer, not computer. Is that better?
Yeah.
Good ideas don't get old, so in the way I work, it's just one principle I try to hold on to regardless of how I execute the idea. And I think that's obviously something in Milton's work. And, you know, in terms of what dates, what goes out of date doesn't go out of date. If it's a good idea, it tends to stay a good idea.
Yeah, I think that's really true. And I mean, I think we'd all agree that, you know, I mean, there's some work is style-based, some work reflects its era, and certainly true of Milton's work, that there's work that looks very 1970s and 1980s, but I Love New York looks as fresh now as it did when he first did it.
And a lot of his work can sort of be dismissed, particularly in terms of style, if it's sort of reflective of the 80s. But when you have him explain the work, which is often not possible for a lot of designers to do, you're right, it does make sense that behind, whether it be a sort of pastel watercolour illustration for a poster or a sort of hard edge cut paper collage, there's a good idea behind everything he does, or at least a consideration. But that's always hard to translate when things are seen at a glance.
When Vanity Fair magazine was relaunched on the market, the guy that designed it was Milton Glaser. So if you look at Vanity Fair magazine now, the master, obviously, I've got the copy of it. There was an illustration of his on the cover, but the masthead is exactly the same. Obviously, it's morphed, but the actual germ and the actual sort of the design of that magazine was Glaser. So whether you call that old-fashioned or what, I don't know. But in America, there's a lot of nostalgia that works through a lot of their design, if you like. And even the Obama campaign, although it was done in this present day, to me it had nostalgia with it. I don't know whether you want to comment on this, but that's my feeling.
Yeah, it's very bookish, that work. The work from New York looks quite bookish and heavily ingratiated with the publishing kind of references. There was a comment I saw. I was just going to make a mention of it.
I'll just take a quick... When Milton was talking about drawing, I drew a sketch of him, and I just want to walk down and show everyone. Also, I've got I wore this today. It's a polka dot heart, just that, self-referencing and that. Okay, I'll walk down and quickly show everyone my sketch, which, as he said, did change the act of drawing changes your brain. So thankfully my brain has been changed this morning, so thanks everyone.
Can we see the drawing as well?
Hello, how are you?
Hello.
Okay, so I was listening before, sorry I'm not sure what your name is, but you were talking about the idealism of not accepting certain jobs. I work as a concept illustrator, and I've been doing so for the last 7 years. And I found that very early on in my career, there are definitely times when you have to work and do jobs that you don't particularly like, because the outcome would mean that you've worked on a big project, or you've worked in an area that you kind of want to push forward to. So I definitely think that at the early part of your career, you kind of have to do a little bit of that. But it's also a very slippery slope that if you aren't mindful of as you progress with your career, sometimes you'll be like, where do you draw the line? Am I still working simply for the dollars, or am I actually pushing my career in the direction that I kind of want to? And I suppose I've only just really noticed this now because I'm sort of running my own business, and I've been doing so for the last couple of years now, and I have a very definite idea of where I want to push my career.
Have you got a question?
Yes. Cool. And I suppose, being idealistic, you kind of have to keep some of that. Otherwise, you'll basically just flow whichever, wherever the winds are blowing. I mean, did you feel that's... It just seemed like you wanted to go somewhere with that, but you didn't kind of go forward.
What's a concept illustrator, by the way? Is that the same as an illustrator? Or is
no, I mean, I design for film and movies, and design toys and characters for video games, that sort of thing. So.
No, I think what you're saying is very true. I think when you first start, and this is only my experience, when you start working, you're swept up with what you're doing. You get excited about everything you're doing, and it's all thrilling. But there's a certain period in your life where you start reflecting back. And I mean, Milton obviously has got an awful lot of time to reflect back upon things, and sometimes I think you can be quite idealised the way you see things, and I'm sure there was a time for him, and that's what it would have been interesting to ask him, that's where the specific question about was there a time when your moral compass you had to use it, and use this cigarette packaging as an example of that. I think we all go through very similar experiences. I think if you talk to anybody here, there's a time in your life where you just have to do the work, and you are aware. The important thing is you keep on asking the questions. I think there are people who maybe don't ask those questions. They get to a point where they make a decision, and the decision is it's about money and the family that you have to support, so you make that decision, or it's about having employees you have to feed. So those decisions are not made in isolation. They're all informed by your experience. And from Milton's point of view, I think the thing is he does have a record of having always questioned what he's... And he's always been politically involved as well. He's always done posters, or he's been willing to give his time and to do things. Even at September 11, he actively pursued a statement. He did this revisiting of the I Love New York, and that shows that even at that point in his life, he still wants to make a point, and he's still questioning what he's doing and analysing what he's doing. And that, to me, is the most important thing, is that you continue asking the questions. When you stop asking those questions, you know that you've either given up and your work is not what it was maybe when you first started, or I think it's a really healthy thing to keep on asking those questions.
I just think you know when things are right and wrong, and you just need to be in tune with that. It's a heart thing. Sorry, Milton. And as my grandfather said, who didn't say very much, but one thing he used to say a bit was, anyone can pick up shit. And I think it's all about that sort of notion of just being really connected with how you feel about a person or a client or a cigarette sort of company, and you make that decision.
Yeah, it would have been really interesting to sort of get from him that idea. Have you had points in your career where you felt disillusioned? I mean, I think that's the thing. You see him now, and he is reflecting back on his life. So, was there a period where he just fell out of love with it, and he realised he was being sucked into the vortex of making money? And there certainly were. I mean, he did lots of supermarket jobs. Sorry, Michaela, keep on.
No, I was just going to say, designers seem to always be optimistic and very... they want to look at the good side of things a lot, and I think that makes it really hard, because when he talks about, I wouldn't even go to lunch with someone I didn't like, and sometimes I don't know who I don't like at first. It takes me a while to work that out, and I think he now has clarity to say those things, but as a younger designer, I think it can take a while to figure those things out and achieve that.
That was probably, I think that was probably the strangest comment, but because I like a lot of my clients, but I wouldn't go to lunch with them.
You don't have time.
How many of your clients don't you like? I don't know if there's any here.
Hello.
Hi.
I'd just like to touch on the drawing with a pencil versus the computer. And I think it's important because I believe that you can still draw with a computer. There's really no difference in your ability to use each of those mediums. But I think Milton really highlighted the idea that the computer is actively trying to make you do certain things, whereas a pencil doesn't at all. It has nothing. It's just a pencil, and it's only you that can drive the pencil, whereas a computer can drive you. And so he talked about his dancing with his younger designers on the computer, and that was a way of him overcoming those preconceived sort of things that the computer wants him to do, to be able to literally draw with the computer.
I actually don't think it's a case of the pencil versus the computer. I think you can draw on a computer, and I've seen some amazing drawings on computer. And there's some incredible drawings by pencil. I remember an epiphany in the Prado in Madrid when I first stood in front of Hieronymus Bosch's Garden of Earthly Delights. It was painted on canvas with paint, with hog's hair brushes, and I've never seen anything like it. I mean, it's sort of the ability to actually, in the human ability to put marks down on anything is really quite remarkable. I think the one thing about what Glaser was on about with the pencil, or with, I mean, it sort of seems like we sort of crushing this a little. I think it's the actual fact that your hand, it's actually we're flesh and blood, and it's touching something with your hand. And with a computer, there's actually a divide with that. And I think philosophically it's an interesting one, and especially for an old fart like me, because it's sort of, I still don't use a computer to actually physically draw, but it's sort of, anyway, look, it's I think it's an ongoing discussion, by the way. I don't think it's one versus the other, and it's a good point you make.
Yeah, I agree.